All right, ladies and gentlemen, we here are going to talk about something called American culture change. This is a tutorial to help you understand the topics that we studied in USII6c, which was the U.S. cultural change, the culture climate of the 1920s and 30s. And the way we talked about culture climate in the 1920s and 30s is similar to what we see here with these paintings here, okay, that they're divided into two different cultural groups. One cultural group will be your urban. So all these artists and writers and musicians concentrated on the two cultural identities of the United States, which is the urban cultural identity, the city life, and the rural cultural identity, which is your country life. Okay? Now, one artist that we talked about, her name is Georgia O'Keeffe. And Georgia O'Keeffe was a painter who in her early years, okay, so she was young, painted paintings of urban scenes. And when she was older, painted paintings of rural scenes, most particularly in the southwest region, New Mexico and Arizona. Okay? That's all you really need to know about Georgia O'Keeffe. Painter, painted while she was young, painted scenes in the urban scenes, and then when she was older, she painted rural scenes. There are two writers you need to know. Okay? You have F. Scott Fitzgerald, Scott Fitzgerald. Let's zoom out. This guy here, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and another guy, John Steinbeck. I'll zoom in here. That's a C and a K. Okay? And these folks are both writers. Let's see if we can get that right there. Okay. These guys are both writers. In fact, what we'll do, we'll actually make a bridge map that connects these two characters. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote about the Jazz Age. Okay? So flappers, vamps, speakeasies. John Steinbeck wrote about the Great Depression. Now, Fitzgerald, the Jazz Age, mostly focuses on urban, while the Great Depression in Steinbeck's work focuses mainly on rural. Okay, so this is rural. Make sure you know that Fitzgerald and them are actual urban. Okay, you also have two other artists. These are musicians. Okay, in fact, I'm not going to use this one. We'll do. We have two musicians. We'll just go ahead and erase this guy. We don't really need that right now. But you have two musicians. You have Gershwin. George Gershwin, and you have Aaron Copland. They are musical composers, made orchestra type of music, style music, and these guys wrote unique American music. Okay? So that's essentially, that's all of the first part of 6C, American cultural identity, that you really know. So you need to know that you have Georgia O'Keeffe, who painted scenes of the urban and the rural scenes, so paintings of the Southwest and urban scenes. You have F. Scott Fitzgerald, talked about the good times of the Jazz Age, the urban setting of the Jazz Age, and you have John Steinbeck, who were about rural, poor, migrant farm workers of the Great Depression. two different time periods. Now, the next individual, what we focus on is the Harlem Renaissance. And that brings us to the next slide I have here. The first person we talk about is this painter here, his name is Jacob Lawrence. Now, Jacob Lawrence his paintings often had African cultural roots, like a lot of colors, African style colors that he saw in his view of what he saw when he would visit African countries. Lots of reds, lots of yellows, lots of blacks, lots of greens. He also showed the strength of African American workers. In fact, they say that he told a story or chronicled, telling a story, the Great Migration. Through his art. So all of his paintings tell another story, that African Americans were experiencing during the Great Migration. And the next slide we'll talk about the literature portion. If I can press the button. The next person we'll explaining about, is a guy by the name of Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes. Now, he was a poet who combined African and American culture roots. So he's a poet combined African and American cultural roots. And that's essentially what you know about him. The next group, we're going to talk about the three different musicians who are all jazz composers. Well, there's two jazz composers and one blues singer. The jazz composers are Duke Ellington, there's two L's here, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Louis Armstrong. These guys are both, let's go ahead and zoom. These guys over this way. These folks are all jazz composers. They made jazz music. All right, and the next person we need to talk about is a lady by the name of Bessie Smith. And she is a blues singer. That's pretty essentially what it is. It's very simple, okay? This whole unit is incredibly simple. There are just a few names that you need to know, and you need to be able to connect the names to what they did or what their contributions were. Now, keep in mind that this era known as the Harlem Renaissance, these folks that we just talked about, Jacob Lawrence, Duke Ellington, Langston Hughes, Louis Armstrong, and Bessie Smith, they were all contributors to the Great Migration, the Harlem Renaissance, which was a rebirth of African American cultural identity. And this also, the art of these musicians didn't only tailor to the African American community. In fact, the rest of the community, all of American community, black and white, all appreciated and enjoyed this art, especially the music of the time. In fact, they created the first form of pop music. Now, what I want to do on the next slide, I want to show, I want to show you guys some ways of using the analogies or the bridge maps to be able to decipher between these individuals. One that you guys had a problem with was, and let's see, is this one, that, was Fitzgerald is to Steinbeck as this one would be Copeland is to Gershwin. So Fitzgerald is to John Steinbeck as Copeland is to Gershwin. How these two relate is that they are authors, and how these two relate, they are both composers. In fact, if I want to make this a little more accurate and be able to use multiple steps or the two different, like to be able to combine American cultural growth and Harlem Renaissance, what I would do is I would say do something like O'Keeffe is to urban and rural. As Jacob Lawrence is to African and American. No, not African American, I'm sorry. Lawrence is to Great Migration. And what we have here is we can say their relating factor how they relate is that that's what they paint about, or their paintings. So George O'Keeffe painted paintings of the rural and urban America, as Jacob Lawrence painted paintings of the Great Migration. This tutorial should help you with this topic. It's not that difficult, and I hope you can use this to review for when you retake your tests or quizzes, or to be prepared for the tests coming up. All right, take care now. Bye-bye.